Dawn had not yet drawn its blade across the horizon when Oberyn Martell stepped from the shadowed colonnade into the open light of the palace roof. The stones of Sunspear held last night's heat like a memory cupped in old hands, and the air tasted faintly of salt and the sweet dust of the Rhoynar winds. He rolled his shoulders once, testing the day, and the long ash haft in his palm answered with a patient balance. A viper wakes the same way a man does, slowly, with hunger and a mind for the particular quiet of first movement. He wore only a linen wrap at the hips, the fabric pale from sun and brine. Scars traced fine crescents over his ribs, a handwriting of former encounters. Below him the city stirred in factions. The harbor clapped and creaked, gulls described strange letters in the sky, and somewhere a baker's boy shouted for sugar to be brought quickly, quickly. He set the butt of his spear against the stone and leaned, listening as if the day would disclose itself without further coaxing. When he moved, it was without flourish. The first pass cut the air before him, a simple line obeyed. The second spiraled, the third and fourth were variations learned not from manuals written in cool rooms but from the grain of the ash itself. He had taught himself to hear through his hands. He turned at the waist, slid, stepped again. A rhythm built. Breathe, strike, recover. Breathe, strike, recover. And with it came a clarity that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with alignment. Even at ease he was prone to laughter, but it never wandered into these mornings. He gave his attention to the spear and to the ghosts any weapon carries in its shadow. By the time the sun's rim lifted from the Sea of Dorne, Hota had appeared, as he always did, without announcement. The captain's beard thinned to white at the chin, and he stood beyond reach, watchful at the boundary where this private ritual gave way to duties that could not be postponed. Prince. The title in his mouth was always a weight evenly distributed. Oberyn lowered the spear to his side and cocked his head as if to better hear a bird somewhere out of sight. Do you come to tell me my brother sends for me or to counsel moderation in everything, as if it were a diet? The prince has asked for your company at this hour. And if I had said no? Oberyn smiled. I like to make Doran wait. It cools his temper from tepid to cold, though truthfully I have never seen it any other way. He said you would be ready. Then he is right. He has a gift for accuracy about things that do not require courage. He offered the spear to a servant who had crept close with the caution of someone approaching a sleeping cat, then wrapped a light scarf over his shoulders. Come, Hota. Let us oblige our cautious brother. There is a wind today. I would see if it brings a scent from the east. East? Hota asked, falling into step beside him on the stair. Where dragons were, Oberyn said, not bothering to affect secrecy, and where one is said to be again. They crossed quiet corridors where air moved like slow music. On the walls, tiles told long stories of water and departure. Women in narrow boats at dusk, a river made of glass and fire, a child holding a shell to her ear with an expression of astonishment. The great hall of Sunspear opened like a mouth. Here it was cool enough to forget there had ever been any sun at all. Doran Martell waited at the far end, his chair carved of dark wood and inlaid with scenes from the founding. Nymeria's face set in dozens of slightly different mosaics, so that no matter where you stood she seemed to be looking slightly away from you, as if toward something only she could see. Ilaria Sands stood behind Doran's chair, not as an attendant but as one who claimed the room's attention by refusing to ask for it. Her hair was pulled into a knot with a bronze pin. The pin was drilled at intervals with small holes that held the perfume Oberyn liked best, made from night-blooming flowers that only opened when the moon was fat. Arian sat on the low steps to Doran's right, one ankle resting upon her opposite knee, a languid geometry. Nymeria and Tyene flanked her with sharpness disguised as slouch, and Obara lounged a little apart with her arm thrown over a spear too short to be useful for anything other than reminding anyone present what she was. Oberyn approached with an easy gait that included a fraction more sway than necessary, as if the floor were the deck of a ship. "Brother," he announced, "you relieve me from improbable perfection. If I had practiced for another half-hour, I would have begun to believe I had nothing left to learn, and then some fishmonger's angry son would have killed me in the street." Doran's hands were folded. His eyes were already weary, as if the conversation had aged him in anticipation. "I prefer you unkilled everywhere," he said. "Though if it must be in a street, choose a narrow one. Fewer spectators." A flash of teeth from Oberyn. "It would not be a Dorn without wry counsel at breakfast." "It is not breakfast," Oberyn muttered. "Unless you drink before midday and call it something else." "Do not blaspheme against flexible time," Oberyn said, and accepted a goblet from a servant who had risen like a plant from the cool stone of the floor. He tasted it and said to the room, "Citrus stolen from my daughter's orchard, watered with my brother's tears. Refreshing." Tyenne's giggle fell like ribbons on tile. Illaria's gaze met his, and the corner of her mouth lifted without comment. Doran's patience arrived in a single inhalation. "There is a message from the east," Doran said. "Ah," Oberyn said, spreading his hands. "Then the wind obeys me. From Meereen." "Long journey for a letter," Nymeria said. "Further still for truth," Doran gestured. Ariohoda withdrew a scroll from his sleeve and offered it to Oberyn, who did not take it. He loved to resist solemnities for the way they broke their own glamour when pressed. "Read it, Hoda," Oberyn said. "Perhaps in your voice even a lie will sound practical." The captain broke the seal. He read in the uninflected manner of someone who believes feelings are the coin of people who cannot reliably manage their hands. The letter was not a letter as much as it was several different letters, written at different times. The formal proclamation from Meereen's queen describing the end of certain practices and the beginning of certain law. A second piece, more intimate, penned by a hand that introduced itself as Missandei of Noth, interpreter, who in precise language extended an invitation to envoys of blood and friendship from Dorne to witness the queen's rule and speak of old ties. A third, rougher thing. Appended as if by accident, several names of ships that had gone missing in Slaver's Bay and the rumors strung along those disappearances, along with the first gloss of a sigil long thought interrupted. A three-headed dragon that had not ceased to be itself even after years of being only a memory. When Hoda finished, there was no music in the room, which Oberyn noted as if it were a remark someone had spoken too softly. He reached then, took the vellum and traced a finger over the ink that declared an end to purchase of human bodies. It was careful writing. Little accidents at the joins showed where the hand refused to hurry itself. "I remember," he said, "when caravans came up the Greenblood, and how they pretended to be lighter for their cargo being chained. I remember our mother's face. She did not make so many expressions, but there was one that meant she was counting her own breaths, so she did not run into the water and tear the boats open with her hands." Doran's mouth tightened. "We have ended the trade in Dorne." "Unilaterally," Oberyn said, letting the syllables fall like small coins. "And law obeys power, or it is a letter on hot stone. She ends it where such things were coin and custom." "She is a girl," Nymeria said. "A young queen who must wish to be old enough to be thought dangerous. Every child playing against the light invents a shadow that belongs to them and wears it as a cloak." "Her shadow breathes fire," Tyene offered, mild. Illaria's voice came then, quiet and unadorned. "And she is kin in a fashion." Silence changed its shape. Even Ariohoda blinked. "Say it," Arianne said to Illaria. "Say it as if you were not a little in love with the shape of your own secrecy." Illaria tilted her head. "We know what we know," she said. "Before Rhaegar married Elia, House Targaryen and House Martell were not empty of each other. Blood is not a straight thread. The girl is Targaryen, and our blood flowed toward theirs. If you search the riverbed, you find pieces of one pot in another." "Our mother," Oberyn said, and there was something in his throat that he did not often let sit there. Not because he disliked the flavor, but because it changed him, and he enjoyed controlling the times he allowed himself to be changed. "Elia was... she was a song I do not teach, a song I know in my bones. They broke her. Rhaenys, Aegon. Names are stones. I keep them in my pocket so I do not forget their weight." He lifted the letter again, turned it in the light. "And this is a dragon girl who frees slaves and writes carefully, whose hand does not hurry itself. She will be told she is a conqueror because she has the force to be one. But perhaps she is not one thing. People rarely are. Doran folded his fingers until his knuckles whitened, the only visible extremity of his interior life. Rumor is not a plan. No, Oberyn said. But a plan that lives without rumor is a plan conceived by someone who has already lost his war and wishes to hold his house in perfect order until it falls. Arianne rose. And what do you intend to make of this rumor, uncle? Me? Oberyn put the letter down. I intend to go and see if the blood we shared with a dead king can bear fruit with a living queen, if in her are the seeds of an answer to a question we have held too long in our mouths. I will look and judge what she needs and what we can be for each other. You intend to go, Doran said, as one might note the climate evolving. There is a distinction between thought and announcement that you have rarely observed. If I tell you I am going to sleep, I may yet talk an hour. If I tell you I intend to go east, my boots will be on the quay by daybreak. He glanced at Ilaria. If she asks me to stay, I might yet stand another day. But she will not ask. She knows how long I last in any one room before I begin to make snow out of ashes. Ilaria moved from behind Doran's chair only enough for the light to catch the side of her face. I will not ask, she said. I would lie to hold you, and that is not love. Bring me a story I have not heard. Bring me the taste of a wind that has never crossed my lips. And if the woman is not what your rumor makes of her, return with your hands unbloodied. That I cannot promise, Oberyn said with a grin, because humor was the way he kept grief from picking the locks of his chest. But I will try to kill only those who would make you sad. Nymeria said, if you go, you will not go alone. Obara rolled her eyes, but her hand flexed around her spear. Tyene clasped her hands as if in prayer, though Oberyn knew that behind the mesh of her sweetness lived a knife that smiled in its own language. I have no need of an honor guard, Oberyn said. They would not be an honor guard, Arianne said, a slight impatience drawing a line between her brows. They are your daughters. Half of them, Oberyn said. Enough, Doran murmured. He sat straighter, and in that tightening of posture the whole room took a breath. You will go, brother, and you will not swagger without sense. I will sign letters to be carried under seal, words that can be read in place of trust by those who have none. You will ships enough to make a statement, not enough to make a war by yourself. You will remember that when I close my hand here in Sunspear, the fingers that belong to the hand in the east are yours. Oberyn dipped his head in acknowledgement. I will wear your caution like a scarf. It will keep my throat from sunburn. Doran looked up at Ilaria and then at Arianne. You see that he does not turn the scarf into a tourniquet. They laughed by reflex, and laughter became a rope between them. Later there would be argument, the practical frenzy of supply lists, the subtle tyranny of paperwork. For the moment, the morning stood, whole and unspent, bearing the weight of decision as a dancer carries a partner, firmly with the anticipation of movement. When Oberyn left the hall, Ilaria went with him. They walked out along the covered way that led down toward the water gardens, past carved screens that threw complicated shadow lace across their skin. No words at first. That was another of the ways they fitted. Neither needed to fill the empty of a corridor with sentences that did not yet know what they wanted to be. At length Ilaria said, I remember how you came back the first time you fought in the eastern pits, high on your own heart. Everyone was afraid for you, though you said we were afraid of you. Both were true, he said. I was very beautiful when I was young. You are very beautiful now, she said, and he gave her a look that held a theatrical skepticism. She punched his shoulder gently. Do not pout. It puts lines at the corners of your mouth that other people will mistake for gravity. We both know you find gravity exhausting. The girl frees slaves, he said, shifting to keep ahead of the ache that pooled in him when he lingered too long in the shape of his own face. That is a particular act. It is not the sort of virtue one performs because it is fashionable. She could also be foolish, Ilaria said. When I was a girl, there was a woman in Planky Town who insisted the sea was soft because it looked soft. She tried to teach it to hold things. Fishermen lost baskets following her theories. It is dangerous to believe the sea will be as you would like. I have never believed anything would be as I liked, Oberyn said. Not even you. Especially not you. She smiled. If you find her, you will put your head too near her fire. And perhaps I will be warmed, he said. Do you want me to bring you a gift? Bring yourself back alive when it pleases you, she said. And not a moment sooner. If you bring me jewels, I will sell them for wine for the orphans who sing on the Greenblood, and you will pretend to be angry for a night and then you will forget. They had reached the balcony that looked over the gardens, where children leapt from stone to water with shouts that made the shade vibrate. He turned to her then and pressed his forehead to hers. The kiss of Dorne is not a rite, but it has a consistency. It is a promise shaped like a breath shared. He felt her laughter move through her skull into his. I am not finished speaking to you, she said, eyes closed. You are never finished speaking to me, he replied softly. I am the canvas you keep painting on because there is always room for another flower. Do not die for their ghosts, she said. Elias, the children's. The living will be harmed. I will live for them, he said. You would make poetry out of a wound, she said, and kissed him hard enough to peel the veneer from his humor. In the harbor at Planky Town, the hulls already lifted and settled like animals that had chosen the sea over land and not regretted it. Oberyn walked the docks with an inventory balanced on the skin behind his eyes. Water skins, salted lamb, oil, tar, spare sailcloth, coils of rope that had their own moods. Men from the Greenblood's banks moved among the piles, their hands more accustomed to rivercraft but long practiced in saying yes to the sea and then making that yes true. The orphans who had never sought to be anything other than a question mark between two cultures sang while they worked. An old Roynish song about a woman who invited the river to sleep in her bed and woke with her hair full of fish. Ships were chosen not for the noise of their reputations but for their habits. Oberyn ran his fingers over planks and listened as if the wood spoke in a dialect he understood better than he understood some of his brothers among men. He liked narrow-beamed cogs that did not fancy their own bulk and vessels that had weathered enough storms to have lost the vanity of new boats. He selected a longship from the orphans fitted with a shallow draft, remembering the unpredictable shoals along eastern deltas. He took 2 round-bellied traders that could be armed modestly and not throw their nerves into it at the first sign of a sail on the horizon. He refused a great showpiece galley whose prow was carved in the snarl of an ASP. The carver had been very proud. Pride has its place. Oberyn preferred it aboard men rather than boards. Prince, said a man with arms like knotting rope, presenting a coil of chains studded with mean spikes. For pirates, run it under the skin of their hull if you slide alongside. They bleed proof that they were touched. Oberyn grinned. Have you named it? I call it regret. Then I will take 10 lengths, Oberyn said. Because I have never yet known a voyage without enough regret to justify ballast. The wind came every afternoon from the same direction, teaching the knotted ranks of masts to gesture as if in conversation. At night, lanterns made small territories of light on the water that shifted as if under a shallow animal's breathing. Oberyn used those nights to walk the decks and let the sea tell him what he might expect of it. Men left playing boards to watch him pass and lowered their eyes, then raised them again, and sometimes he stopped and played around for the rag-wrapped coppers they wagered, taking none if he won, giving twice back if he lost. He learned names the way he learned wind, not in a hurry. Obara argued for command of one of the larger ships. He declined and took her onto the nimble orphan craft where the distance between water and hull was smallest. She protested once and then began to love the way the river-borne boat had the sea's ear and did not bellow but whispered requests the sea sometimes granted. Nymeria made herself indispensable at a table with wax and feather, reshaping men's accounts to match reality rather than hope. Tyene ministered to small hurts, her astringents and perfumes turning the air near the sick berth into something like a garden where nothing bloomed too violently to be helpful. They were dangerous like different weathers, and he placed them where their harm would be done to enemies and their charms to allies. Arianne came to the quay to watch the departure. She wore no crown, but something in her posture suggested she had considered how it would sit. She embraced him with more pressure than her poise allowed to admit. "Write," she ordered. "I will send you letters with such detail you will feel you have gone yourself." he promised. Then you will contrive to correct my descriptions with your own, and I will be very angry and drink alone while pretending I am not waiting for your second letter. Do not drink alone, she said. There are always 2 or 3 who would make your solitude better company. He kissed her cheek. You are dangerous. I learned from you, she said, and stepped back, eyes bright in the unkind light. Doran did not come down to the pier. It was not his way to be seen participating in departures. He could not control once they had begun. He sent Hota in his stead with a leather packet of letters and a final note written in his ubiquitous careful hand. A list of things not to do, all of which, Oberyn observed, would be required at some point and should be done brilliantly or not at all. He read a few lines, laughed low, and pressed the packet beneath his cloak as if it were a charm sewn into the lining. On the morning the fleet turned their white bellies to the horizon. The sea was a mouth barely open. The sails bellied slow, then firmed. Lines went taut. The long, low chuff of water against hull took on its proper music. Men shouted, women shouted, gulls shouted for some scrap of significance, and the city began to become small behind him. The wind came from the south at first, then veered. He felt it before the helmsman confirmed. He took up a position he liked near the bow where spray could reach him, where he could taste the day's intentions. East, he said, and the word made a shape in his mouth. East tasted of old coins and spice and mistakes that had grown fat and were now too heavy to be easily moved. He tipped his face into the wind and extended his arms as if to present himself to a court, naked of defense. The stepstones were a puzzle of honest pirates and official thieves. Both groups wore rings and smiles with equivalent care. The fleet kept to waters far enough that no one with ambition and a single deck could decide to test a legend against a ledger. Oberyn slept on deck among ropes arranged to cradle without injury, and woke from dreams of rooms with walls made of scales. In one such dream, the scales rearranged themselves like shutters opening to let in light. He woke laughing, not because he understood but because he so rarely mourned the failure to understand. Near Tyrosh they took on fresh water and salt fish so new they had not yet reconciled themselves to being dead. A red-bearded man tried to sell him a pair of parrots whose tail feathers were longer than a child. The parrots screamed alchemical syllables, and one of them called Oberyn a prince in a tone of insult. He declined and bought instead a small casket of cinnamon that tasted of heat inside the throat and a spool of silk thread whose color resisted naming. The silk he pocketed. The cinnamon he circulated among the crews, telling them to chew it when the night made them feel as if they were more alone than a single man ought to be. He found, in a market along the quay where a woman boiled sugar into shapes that looked like cities, a bundle of letters left by some previous traveler and collected for sale by a boy who had only recently decided to entrust himself to the whims of honest paper. He bought the bundle entire, went back to his vessel, and read until the letters rearranged the day. He learned that a man from Volantis had once set out to build a bridge of boats to cross a stretch of water whose name had been forgotten, and had only achieved another kind of failure that his grandchildren used as a landmark to meet at midsummer. He learned that a woman in Qohor had dreamed of a long mirrored room and had gone through life comparing every real room to what she had seen and dying dissatisfied, and yet her letters were joyful because she had learned to admire her own dissatisfaction as a kind of fidelity. He read a list of debts paid in chickens and promises. He learned the cost of a minor spice when a river rose and closed a road. He liked being crowded by the lives of strangers. Obara fought a sailor who had laughed when she corrected his knot. She broke his nose and then reset it while he insulted her in terms that would have embarrassed a donkey. Tyene dosed him and carved a thin line with a razor to ease the swelling. Nymeria wrote the names of both on a list she kept inside the cuff of her sleeve. 2 columns, gratitude and grievance, and told them their accounts with her were now balanced uneasily. Oberyn watched, amused at how order and mess, like lovers long accustomed to each other, could not resist foreplay even in plain view. He wrote as he had promised to Arianne. His letters were untidy, freer than the careful ink of Meereen's queen. He invented metaphors, then crossed them out and invented simpler ones, and crossed them out too, leaving the page with ghosts of ideas beneath the words that remained. He told her how the nights felt larger than they properly were, How the sea allowed you to believe you had done something brave when all you had done was agree to float. He told her that the men spoke more softly on deck than they did in cities, as if the sea could overhear and correct them. He told her a story about a boy who had named each rope on deck and sang to them in the morning. He told her nothing about fear, though he felt it now and again, as one feels a small stone in a shoe and chooses to keep walking instead of stopping to remove it. In the 7th week they saw their first dragon, though at first it was not a dragon in any way that could be admitted without laughing at themselves. It was a shadow that stitched itself to a cloud and then cut free. It was a part of the sky that refused to remain merely a part of the sky. Men stopped chewing and their cheeks sagged. A sound like the rumble of a fire before anyone has fed it enough to begin telling its true story. Oberyn felt the hair rise along his arms as if he were a cat near lightning and remembered a piece of a tale his mother had told. A city far upriver where masked women wore costumes of shimmering scales and danced without touching the ground. He said nothing. To speak would be to make it smaller. Obara rested her hands on the rail and watched with a fixed expression, as if willing herself not to be a child in this moment. Tyenne's eyes filled and spilled over. She laughed at herself as she wiped her cheeks. Nymeria, who had rarely allowed awe to lift her brows, made a soft sound and leaned forward the way one leans toward the beginning of a formal music. The dragon did not come near the ships. It made a slow pass like a magistrate inspecting appropriations, and then moved on toward a sky that seemed less itself in its wake. Later, men leaned on barrels and told each other different versions of what they had seen until each ended up holding an account whose shape fit the size of his own credulity. The waters near Slaver's Bay were its own country. The air wore a different weight. Far ahead, the low shore smoked in places like a house that has not been properly extinguished. They found wreckage and a boy clinging to a plank who told in broken words about a galley that had chosen the wrong night to brag about its master. He slept with his hand curled into his mouth like a much younger child. Tyene brushed his hair from his forehead and murmured as if she had been born to lull. Myrine rose out of its own mud like a beast half convinced of its prominence. The Great Pyramid's angle cut the light in geometric language, some of it boasting, some of it prayer. Banners rode the breeze. There were people on the docks in a confusion of colors. The smells were assertive: roasted meats, river stink, spice, human hope. Hope, when mixed with fear and hunger, has a strong odor. Oberyn thought he would recognize it anywhere now. He dressed for the city in the only way he believed trustworthy. He wore his ordinary self. A linen wrap, sandals, a vest stitched by an orphan woman whose needle had the quiet charisma of perfect work. He cinched a knife at his back where habit, his and everyone else's, would place it near his front. Obara wore trousers like a dare and a smile like a weapon. Nymeria draped herself in a cloth that at first appeared purple and then, in the sun, showed threads of blue and red arguing themselves toward harmony. Tyene chose something white and pale green, and the air near her seemed cooler by 2 degrees because she had decided it would be kind to be so. Protocol found them within minutes. An honor guard of Unsullied, shields and spears held at exactly the height that suggests a precise agreement between the person and the weapon. Their commander's face was made to be misread as blankness. Oberyn recognized the opposite. This was a man not because his history had left him certain, but because he had negotiated a viable truce with his uncertainty. He admired that. A woman approached who might have been a piece of fine writing brought briefly to life. Missandei, she named herself, voice clear and warm, greeting them in the common tongue and theirs. She bowed in a way that suggested she possessed deep reserves of respect and would distribute it as deserved, neither prodigal nor stingy. "Welcome," she said, "to the city, and to the intention that made it become what it has not yet learned to be." "That is an honest sentence," Oberyn said. "I will like you." Her eyes brightened a fraction, pleased and wary in equal measure. "I have come to guide you to the Queen." They passed through streets where stalls had sprouted like mushrooms after rain. There were faces marked by wariness like scars, and others hallmarked by a joy that could not yet believe in itself. Children raced in packs with the half-wild discipline of creatures who are both cared for and alone. Oberyn paused to watch a girl juggle 3 stones and a cracked pot lid. She kept them in the air with a fierce attention that no doubt would one day be read as charisma. He gave her a coin, and she made the sort of bow a child makes when she is not practiced at it but intends to become a master of every useful thing. The girl ran, and a boy ran after her, wanting the coin, and another boy ran after him, wanting a share in wanting, and the city arranged itself into its usual preferences, a choreography of hunger and brightness. The Great Pyramid had its own calm. In its shadow, men lowered their voices without thinking. Missandei spoke lightly of the way that a change of government requires the invention of 1,000 small rituals. A man to announce the hour at a door that used to be reserved for the counting of silver, for instance, and a woman to decide how often to wash the banners so their dirt becomes a testimony rather than an embarrassment. Oberyn listened back. As he adored small specifics. Like weapons, they never lied about their uses, only about their intentions. They entered a chamber whose windows took the light and turned it gentle. Barristan Selmy was there, looking as if he had set his armor carefully in a closet where it would not be bumped, and then stolen a glance back at it even as he walked away. His hair had thinned to cloud and halo. When he recognized Oberyn, his eyebrows moved slightly and then refused to perform anymore. They had fought once in a tourney where the entertainment was as much in the audience's curation of allegiance as in the contest itself. Selmy had defeated him by obeying a principle, not an improvisation. Oberyn had admired and mocked him in equal measures, sometimes in the same sentence, a trick he knew irritated men who took their honor seriously. "Ser Barristan," Oberyn said, sketching a bow that retained enough irony to be flirtation with the room's solemnity. "Have you become a pillar? You look like a load-bearing wall." "Prince Oberyn," Selmy said, arranging courtesy like armor. "You look like a story men tell when they wish to feel inadequate. I consider it a courtesy to provide them that opportunity." Missandei cleared her throat with a precision that suggested a lifetime of learning how to move men from comedy into the business that must be done. "The Queen," she said, and a door behind them became a mouth into which gravity drew their attention. Daenerys Targaryen entered without a crown and yet with the air of one whose head had already been taught the weight of gold. She did not smile at once. He liked her not smiling. Too many queens greet the world as if it were a small dog to be reassured. She moved the way a flame moves when there is not enough draft to frighten it. A sure conversation between heat and air. Her hair was pale. The pale not of indulgent winter but of sun bleached to a thing that had survived its own excessive brightness. She looked first at Oberyn, then at his daughters, then over his shoulder at the door through which they had come, as if following the reverse route of their entrance to assess the quality of their decisions. He was reassured. "Prince Oberyn Martell," she said, pronouncing his name as if she wished it to taste right in her mouth. "Welcome, Daenerys," he said, choosing the intimacy of the name not as an insult but as an examination he wished her to feel. "Do you mind my saying it without adornment?" "I do not," she replied. "I have learned that titles are knives. They cut in one direction when we hold them, another when we are held by them." "And which way are you bleeding today?" he asked. Her mouth quirked, the first sign of amusement, and he enjoyed it for the same reason he enjoys certain wines, the knowledge that it had not been poured freely for many. "I do not intend to bleed at all," she said, "but I accept that intentions and outcomes are cousins, not twins." "My mother taught me something like that," he said. "I believe your mother might have as well, had she survived. I have a letter in my pocket from my brother full of not doing this and not doing that. I will do some of those and not do others. That is the way of obedience when it meets the sea." "You have a brother who writes from a cushion," she said. "I had a brother who wrote his desires on the backs of other people's bodies. He died of treating men like paper and fire like silk." Oberyn inclined his head in the acknowledgement one gives a woman who has named her own grief without making of it a spectacle. "My sister," he said, and the guard he kept on his throat lowered just enough to let the name out in its true voice. "Elia." Across the room, Barristan's breath caught like a sleeve on a nail. The Queen's expression altered without changing much. She looked at him properly now, as if the first glance had been a sketch and this was the working portrait. You came because of her, she said. Not only her, but she is in the basket with your reasons. Everything I do has Elia in it, he said simply. I am a man who believes in the uses of memory. And what do you wish to do? She asked. First, I wish to see if you are what your letter suggests. Someone who believes a woman owes no debt to a past where chains were law. Then, perhaps, to speak to you of how women in Dorne live with men differently than they do in other places, and how a river queen once made a desert promise itself to a new tide. Then I will ask you what you intend for an island to the west that is not an island but acts like one these days. Then we will eat and decide whether we like each other enough to consider risking our blood together. He heard Obara exhale a laugh and Nymeria murmur something only Tyene heard. The queen's eyes did not leave his. Walk with me, she said, and turned without looking to see if he would. They went up narrow steps that curved in a spiral too tight for comfort. The Unsullied followed at a discreet interval, and Barristan like a conscience you would not dismiss in case you needed it at the last moment. They emerged into a chamber open to the wind, where the city lay out below like a map that refused to be flattened. Daenerys stood with her hands on the wall and did not lean. She waited. Oberyn took his place opposite her so that the wind could argue with both of them fairly. Tell me, she said quietly, what you know of the men who from the west wrote fables about my father and used my family's name like a stone to hold their doors open. I know your father taught the city to hide two truths under every sheet, he said. I know that when men fear their own impulse, they build a law to sit on it, and sometimes the law grows teeth. I know there were things done in your father's name that would make a wise person leave rather than inherit the ledger. I know you left. I know you lifted chains from necks where men believed they were ornaments. I know you may burn a city as easily as you might save it, because both powers burn, and you are young enough to enjoy the sight. Her chin lifted a fraction. And I know, she said, that your family learned what it meant to be placed second to a song about love that was sung out of season. Women died because of songs. Children died because men put their desires ahead of their oaths. I have considered all my life oaths I did not swear. I intend to swear my own and enforce them. I have made mistakes. I will make more. If I go west, I will not be cherished. I am not certain I wish to be. What do you wish? He asked. She turned and looked beyond him. Something moved there that the light did not own. A bead of air, heavy as if a kiln had exhaled. He did not turn fast. He had learned to make the world come to him by refusing to give it the pleasure of seeing his eyes rush. The dragon landed like a decision. He was darker than the sky had any right to be. His body moved with the casualness of something unchallenged. Oberyn smiled because his fear had chosen to laugh. Does he have a name? He asked. Drogon, she said. He did not say the obvious, that a name is a leash when it is loved and a blade when it is not. He watched instead the play of light across the scales and the way the creature's nostrils widened as he sampled the room. Dragons do not sniff curiosity. They test whether there is anything in the air that can be eaten. He bowed a little, not because the animal required it, but because he thought courtesy between creatures tended to aggravate defenders of civilization, and he enjoyed aggravating them. Drogon, he said softly, and the dragon's head tipped a fraction. He will not behave, Daenerys said, a note of pride inevitably present. Good, Oberyn said. The well-behaved burn too little. They stood in the wind with that third presence and did not talk for some time. In shared silence, truths often negotiate their first contracts. When Daenerys spoke again, it was without the young fire he had expected she might throw in his face. It was the voice of someone who had learned that declarations are knives that dull themselves if used for everything. If we become allies, she said, I will not always be right. I may wrong you. I may wrong your brother, though I do not yet know him. I may ruin a nation in the course of attempting to free it. I have so nearly done so here that I think the definition is a matter of whose grief we count. I will not return us to chains. I will not kneel. I will not be a decoration over a throne that expects me to be grateful for the honor. Good, he said, feeling in himself a mirror that did not distort. I do not deal in gratitude. I deal in balance and in appetite. My brother seeks justice like a man looks for a cool patch of tile on a hot day. I seek it as a dancer seeks a rhythm, because without it the steps cannot follow. I do not mind accidentals in a tune. I do not need everything to resolve. But if you go west, and if we go with you, you will find us refusing to be anybody's footstool. You would prefer to be the chair, she said, and there was humor again. Sometimes the window, he said, often the breeze. She laughed then, the first unguarded sound since they had met. Drogon turned his head and watched her the way large beasts watch the small fierce unpredictables who feed them. Without planning to, they had moved closer to each other. He admired the way she did not disguise that she was assessing him as a possible kind of trouble, the best kind. Tonight, she said, eat with me. Tell me the names of the winds where you come from. I will tell you the names I have given to the voices in this city that speak and are not listened to because they are quiet or because they do not speak the tongue men agree to call common. He bowed. I will eat with you and tell you everything I have counted. He stepped back. And I will ask you what you ask of me. Not my brother, not my house. Me. She nodded once. I will have an answer. Oberyn slept that night in a room that overlooked not the city but a poor courtyard where 3 thin trees had decided to persist. The leaves were the green of limes, a color the desert loves but rarely consents to keep. Voices rose and fell. Somewhere a man tuned an instrument that refused to be satisfied with what he asked. He lay awake for a long time, his mind busy. It was not worry but a texture that he rubbed his attention against as one smooths a whetstone against a blade. He turned on his side and thought of Valeria's hand on the stone of the balcony, of Ariane's command to write, of Doran's lists of knots. He thought of Elia, but he rarely thought of Elia the way other people thought of the dead, as if they were a shrine to be visited according to a calendar. He spoke to her as to a woman seated across a table, whose opinions he wished to convert to action. Look, he told her in his head, you would like her. She did not choose the fire to impress anyone. It built itself inside her because the cold would have killed her otherwise. She is not a song about a sword. She is the sword the song wishes it had the nerve to be about. Morning came, and with it the work he adored, the making of plans that had the sense not to try to be perfect. He met Grey Worm, whose composure made Oberyn want to break something in his presence just to see if the man's face would flinch. It did not. They watched unsullied practice the art of being an idea understood by flesh. Oberyn took a spear from one soldier and spun it once. He tested the balance and made a minor adjustment to the grip a man used when he wished to lengthen a reach without committing the rest of his body. Grey Worm watched without approval or disdain. Both would have been the wrong tools. When the demonstration ended, the commander said, "We learn," in a tone that made learning sound like a march. He found himself falling in love with Missandei's sentences. He had loved Omen and men, and sometimes the manner of their speaking had been the first hook. She had a habit of pausing before the final nut of an idea and then cracking it with one measured word. He asked her, as they crossed a market where vendors arranged salt fish by smell, where she came from, and thus they came to Noth and its butterflies and its invaders and how one can be gentle and also incredibly, dangerously exact. He told her the Rhoynar story about the woman who married the river, and Missandei told him the Nothi story about a king who tried to convince birds of the superiority of letters and was drowned in song after his library burned. He gave her the spool of silk whose color resisted naming. She touched it as if it might refract her touch to someone very far away. In the evenings he ate in the queen's chambers. The food was simple, flatbread, a stew that changed personalities each night, a vinegar that made everything remind him of the precise moment a blade first kisses skin. He described Dorne's heat as a law, not a mood. She described Meereen's resentments as a population one could not exile. Between bites, they drew maps on the table with their fingers, obstinately reimagining the coastlines that men insisted were fixed. They argued over the proper proportion between mercy and punishment, not with the avidity of zealots trying to persuade a god, but with the practical good humor of craftsmen discussing tools. Oberyn did once lose his temper. A man from the old families, disinherited and now loud because silence had never been required of him, petitioned the queen in the afternoon, veins raised like rivers in flood on the back of his hand. He called her, in a roundabout way designed to satisfy his sense of his own cleverness, an usurper of the natural order. Oberyn was at the edge of the room, the way he often preferred to be in public, part of the weather rather than the furniture. He crossed the space without deciding to, and in an instant his voice, which had been laughing a moment before, flared. "Natural order," he said, a phrase for men whose appetites have been fed for so long they believe hunger is a moral failing in others. "I will tell you a little of natural order. Natural order is a mother taking a knife to a rope because it drags at her child's throat. Natural order is the sea agreement with the moon, which pulls at your blood and mine and does not ask our permission. Natural order is a woman of no house name deciding not to die when a man with a whip asks her to. The unnatural thing is your calm expectation that this room will remain arranged for you." The queen said his name once, a tether. He smiled, and the heat stepped back from the front of his mouth, and he put his hands together as if in prayer to a god that had once amused him and no longer did. The man left with a wound that did not show on skin and would not heal as long as he continued to listen only to his own kind. Later, Daenerys came to the balcony again, and he followed. They stood and looked at the dark trembling with the lights of food vendors and lovers and ambitious men and the nearly asleep. "You are fire," she said. "I am," he agreed. "But I like the shape of water." He gestured toward the distant black. "It has always suited our people to claim both." She touched the stone with the palm of her hand, as Ellaria had done with a different stone on a different day and a different sea. "Tell me," she said, "what you would ask of me if we agree to this." He told her. He told her that the ships of Dorne knew a way into the Blackwater that small men had forgotten. He told her that the orphans read the wind better than officials read pleas. He told her that women in Dorne inherited and commanded, and that any alliance that diminished that would meet his teeth. He told her that Doran Martell would send a letter full of modulations and that he, Oberyn, would translate it into action, and that she would, at some point, dislike him for how he did it, and that if she wished to be queen of Westeros she would have to learn to dislike men and still use them. He told her that Ellaria would tease and love her if given the chance. He told her that vengeance is boring when it becomes an only meal, but that it can spice a stew so perfectly that you eat for the joy of it. She listened as if he were drawing a blade from her, not to use against her but to put into her hand. "And what would you give?" she asked when he had finished. "My spear," he said, "my ships, my daughters who will behave like weather and change the rooms you put them in, my brother's letters, even the parts one ignore, my charm, which is both a gift and a weapon, my grief, which is the truest thing about me and therefore the most dangerous thing I could bring to your table, and my willingness to be wrong in your presence, which is rarer than men admit." She looked out over the city that had learned how to hear her name. "Very well," she said. "Let us begin." Word moved through Meereen like a creature released. The queen would enter into friendship and more with a prince from the west whose scent contained citrus and a hint of iron. Some cursed, some sang, some shrugged and returned to the business of eating while the food was hot. In the shadows where knives change owners rapidly, men adjusted plans. In the homes where new babies breathed less shallowly than their parents had at the same age, women whispered and made a show of not being as excited as they were. Oberyn wrote to Doran that night a letter he knew would be kept and reread. "Brother," it began, as if letters had always greeted each other without trembling. "The world is both exactly as you feared and as full of possibility as I require. She is young, and when she speaks she chooses words as if she means to sow with them. She keeps dragons as one might keep storms, not quite with a hand but with a confidence that weather can be spoken to. She is not our mother. She is not Elia. She might be the one who makes sense of what Elia's blood bought and what it was cheated of. If you send me more knots, I will build a rope ladder of them and climb. Send me ships. Send me men who do not mind learning to hear a foreign harbor's arguments. Send me, most of all, your trust sealed and braided. The spear is hungry, brother. Let us choose the meat it eats." He sealed it himself, Missives go faster when they are fed with appetite. He delivered it to Missandei, whose face in reading the salutation told him she understood love between brothers who made themselves enemies in private so the world would not have to. In the weeks that followed, Meereen became a workshop. Rhythms altered. On the river's gray back, men with Dorne's eyes and Essos' scars traded lessons in the handling of rope. The queen walked among them sometimes without armor beyond her own quiet, saying little, allowing those who had last year called her cursed to this year decide whether to revise their language. Oberyn moved like a spark flies, never settling in one place long enough to become expected. He trained with Unsullied and with freedmen whose arms lacked strength and with women who had never before held weapons and learned to place their feet so the ground would treat them with respect. He taught them not his style. Styles are like houses. You are safer if you know where the exits are, but a way to listen to what wood and iron require. Every day he gave himself a small promise, and every day he kept it, to hold in mind for at least the length of one breath the faces of Elia, Rhaenys, Aegon. He did not make the remembrance a show. He did not wrap it in public words. He placed their names like stones at the edge of his inner field and then trained until his shirt was a flag that agreed with the wind. There were nights when he went down into the parts of the city where men test themselves against stupidity. He drank among them and listened to their stories. Men of the ancient families in Meereen learned how to pronounce his name with the level of bitterness they reserved for salt. He watched a woman whose father had died in the pits stand quiet in a doorway and count the men who owed her their lives without knowing it. He gave her coins without purpose attached and did not follow to see what use she made of them. It is rude to watch a blessing. He watched a boy paint a dragon on a wall in 6 strokes and then stand back and not ruin it with a 7th. He made a point of doing one unexpected kindness each day, and also of breaking one small law he found unnecessary, so as not to become the sort of man who thinks good intentions make him virtuous. Sometimes he dreamed of the Blackwater, oil slick and burning. He could smell it even though in his waking life he had never stood on that bank in the hour that made and unmade kings. In his dream, the water opened its mouth and spoke. It said a word he could not hear. He woke and laughed and told Missandei that he needed a better class of nightmares. Illaria's letters arrived like messengers who had conversed with the sun and arrived drunk on its gossip. She told him what he needed to know and then told him something unexpected. A recipe, the shameful thing Arianne had done as a child, which was to steal a cake and then return it because guilt had grown a taste and insisted on being fed too. She described the water gardens in late afternoon when the wind lifted the scent of boy's hair from the water and made it into something that reminded her of grief and lemonade. She asked him nothing about the queen that would have put him in the position of lying, which was love of a clean sort. She signed one with a drawing of a viper and a heart and wrote beneath it, "Choose whether you prefer metaphor or anatomy." He kissed the bottom of the page and put it under his pillow as if he were a superstitious boy and not a man who had built his superstition to a practical size. He sparred once with Barristan. It was not the sort of sparring that produces one winner, only an agreement about the vocabulary of violence. They moved until sweat made their eyes sting and their hands trusted memory. When they stopped, both laughed in the startling way men laugh when their bodies have reminded them they exist. "You will be a problem for them," Selmy said, and did not need to specify who them was. "I am a problem for everyone," Oberyn replied cheerfully. "Myself included, Lord Doran. Especially," he said, and saluted with the spear. The queen watched. She often watched when men put themselves into rehearsals of death. It was a habit of kings and queens, so they could later tell themselves they knew what they asked. She watched in the way of someone who had learned to see without making anyone perform for her gaze. When the duel ended, she put a hand, briefly, on the railing. It was a small movement. He had grown to love small movements. The day came at last when a fleet could be counted not only by its hulls but by its hunger. Dornish sails brightened the bay with familiar mathematics. The orphans came with their river hearts and sea faces. Letters arrived from Doran that tasted of ink and long calculation. Among them, a short line from Arianne. "I am not afraid. Bring me something I do not know how to break." Oberyn kneaded the tension out of his own hands. He looked at Daenerys and saw in her the shade of a woman who had refused a dozen different rooms that men had tried to confine her in. "If we go now," he said, "the sea will accept us. If we wait a week, the sea will accept us too. The difference is in the way our doubt will speak." "We go," she said. They stood upon the deck of a ship whose name had been a proverb in a language almost no one in the crew spoke. The crew had renamed it in their heads and had not yet told the sails. Dany's of the city stood on the quay and did not wave. Some cried, some spat. Some looked at the hulls as if these boats were coins to be FL. Ipped in a bet no one had asked them if they wished to make. Missandei set her hand upon the rail, then lifted it and examined the fine powder that came away. "Sand?" she said, smiling a little. "From home." "Home," Oberyn said, "is a word that keeps learning." They went out over the water and the water took them and did not promise anything.
Men at Oars counted silently.
The wind negotiated politely with the canvas. Behind them, a city held its breath without admitting it. Oberyn stood at the prow with the spear in his hand and did not pose. He placed the spear but down as a man plants a flag not to claim a continent but to remember where he had been. He thought of Elia, he thought of Rhaenys and Aegon, he thought of Valeria and Arianne and Doran and the water gardens in late afternoon. He thought of a young queen who had taught her own name to a city that had forgotten how to listen. He thought of Westeros as a room he had left long ago and would enter again without asking whether it had changed the locks. He tasted the wind and found in it a flavor he could not quite catch. He laughed under his breath, the way a man laughs when a girl throws a stone into the river and hits a fish she had not known was there. He turned his face east for a moment more, and then west, where the land he had always known waited like an old enemy who has learned in your absence to love some portion of your absence. Night fell, and the fleet moved as if it remembered its lines in a play that no one had properly rehearsed and everyone wanted nevertheless to be perfect. The stars wrote their own commentary, indifferent, particular, bright. Oberyn told himself a story he had never told to anyone else, about a river in the desert and a woman made of knives who taught him a kind of kindness that looked like blasphemy to those who prefer their kindness sweet. He did not finish the story, because he preferred knowing it had space to grow later when he needed it. Daenerys came to stand beside him. She wore nothing on her head, and the wind was unkind to her hair. He did not speak first. She did. "When we make land," she said, "nothing will be as we spoke of it. I will offend you. You will charm me into making one less mistake than I would have. We will lose people who deserve not to be lost. We will kill people who deserve to die and some who do not, and we will not be forgiven for those. We will need to choose between the speed of victory and the shape of the world we would like to inhabit after. Tell me now you will not turn into a man who believes the latter is always someone else's problem." "I have never believed that," he said, "and I like you better for naming it." "Do you fear?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "I am not stupid, but my fear and I are well acquainted. Pays rent. I know its habits. I know how to make it sit when company comes." She laughed, soft. The sailors pretended not to notice, because a queen laughing in the dark is not a spectacle. It is a blessing you receive without staring. The dragon above them made no sound at all, but the wind altered when it passed, as if the sky had blinked. "Very well," she said again. It had become a ritual between them now, not of consent but of recognition. Very well. Somewhere far ahead, a shore shaped itself from negative space. The smells of home and enemies and possibility braided. Oberyn felt something in his chest tighten and then release. He pressed his hand to the rails and thought of the weight of a spear. He remembered a morning at Sunspear when he had practiced alone, and his body then had belonged to no plan and no queen and no memory but his own. He loved that man and did not mourn that he was a different man now. He admired change as much as he mistrusted it. "Sleep," Daenerys said, and her voice was not an order but a courtesy. "In a moment," he said, watching the seam between sea and sky as if it held a trick he might learn. "In a moment." He stood so until the moment decided it was his, And then he lay down among coils of rope and dreamed of a river that refused to be anything but itself and a fire that learned, for a breath, to carry water without going out. He woke before dawn. The fleet breathed around him. He smiled into the wind because no one was looking. He stretched his arms wide and felt the day climbing into its armor. "Come then," he told the horizon, keeping his voice low. "Come then." At first light, a dark line resolved itself out of the gray, as if someone had drawn a lid across the sea to keep it from boiling over. The line trembled under the weight of morning and then steadied into cliffs and coves. The jawline of a country Oberyn had loved long enough to know that love and indifference can wear the same face when observed from far enough away. Sails furled and shook out again. A boy climbed a mast so confidently that Tyrish sailors along the rail stopped arguing over a dice game to watch him and adjust their insults to include admiration. The dragon passed once, very high and very quiet, and the wind altered in respect rather than fear. He did not point at the shore. Pointing is a way of telling yourself you are certain of where you are, and certainty sometimes is a skin men where to avoid feeling the weather. The smell came first: dry sage, sun-baked stone, the faint sweet rot of figs fallen earlier than the tree had intended, the sharp hunger of salt. He found himself stepping closer to the prow without planning it. Behind him feet moved, tools clanked. A woman laughed as the vessel reminded her with a sudden yaw that water is no place for possessions to believe themselves eternal. Daenerys came without announcement. He was learning that she preferred to arrive where she intended to be rather than be ushered toward it, as though every doorway were a negotiation and she had decided she had paid enough for the right to cross thresholds in silence. She stood with her hands relaxed, each finger slightly spaced from its neighbor, as if ready to become a claw or a blessing at short notice. "Your country," she said. "Our country," he returned, eyes on the curve of the coast. "If we cannot say it in that order, we should turn around and go home." She watched the land and not him, and he liked her the more for it. "Home," she murmured, "a word that does not keep its shape unless you keep reminding it." "Then we will remind it," he said. Often, annoyingly, Grey Worm appeared, quiet as a decision made earlier in the day. He spoke low. "Boats ahead. Orphans." Oberyn smiled. They heard their own water singing. He shaded his eyes. Dories with patched sails and paddles moved out from the mouth of the Greenblood like small ideas eager to present themselves. Men and women in simple cloths with scraps of color stitched like secrets along seams. He recognized the stance that comes from balancing one's life above a current. Knees unlocked, weight centered as if the body were a modest kingdom that refused to tax its citizens too heavily. The first of them came alongside with the clean geometry of practice. The woman in the bow held a pole and a coil of rope and wore her hair braided with bits of river metal that knocked lightly together. "Prince," she called, bright but not loud. The river did not care for shouting. "You return with friends. The water is generous." Oberyn leaned over the rail, a boy again for a breath. "It is good to be forgiven." "You did not ask," she said. "I am not foolish enough to ask water to forgive," he answered. "I asked you." She flashed teeth. "The river decides through us." Her eyes slid past him to the pale-haired woman at his shoulder. "And the fire?" Daenerys lifted her chin a fraction, which in her was an answer and not a posture. "It will learn manners." The woman nodded as if someone had spoken to her in her own tongue after years of translating herself. "Then welcome. The river has been restless. It will be pleased to be asked to help." She threw her coil. Sailors on both boats caught and tied with the easy exactness of professionals who have been saved by exactness more than once. Planky Town rose crooked and unembarrassed, its piers like fingers that had reached and grown hard at the tips. The smell of tar sat atop all other smells, a law more than a fragrance. Children ran with the confident wildness of those who knew most dangerous edges, had been taught to them not by scolding but by the day itself. Along the shore, baskets of shellfish were set in rows like small armies awaiting deployment. A dog with one ear up and one ear down regarded the visitors with suspicion and then, deciding the bread of suspicion would not feed him, trotted off to inspect a fish head. News ran faster than the Brown River. Eyes crowded their approach. Orphans, salt wives, green blood merchants with their faces tanned to the color of old bronze. A bent man who had been born bent and had turned his bentness into a profession of knowing how to get beneath things other men could not. A girl hopped from one mooring post to another with the fearlessness that invents pride in those who love the fearless and terror in those who prefer their affection less precarious. "Look," someone murmured, "look, the dragon." And someone else said, "It is only a story, keep your hands on the rope." And a third voice that belonged to no one and everyone said, "Stories have teeth today." They had decided before landfall that there would be no parade. Parades promise more than any army can reliably deliver. There would be formalities later, in rooms that allow sentences to sustain their own weight and chairs to hold the bodies of men who believe chairs are proof they exist. For now, the pier met the hull and breath met cheek, and everything was made smaller and bigger by the presence of the dragon far overhead, tracing lazy arcs as if reviewing a ledger. Oberyn stepped onto the wood of the pier as one greets an old lover without the pretense that the intervening years did not deserve reverence. He knelt and placed his palm flat to feel how the river transmitted news from underwater. When he rose, Illyria was there, having come by a night boat that does not ask names. She wore river cloth and a pin in her hair with holes along its length where her scent slept and woke in turns. "You did not ask the water," she said by way of greeting. "I never do," he answered, and when he kissed her, he did not make a performance either of restraint or of reclamation. They had refused to be a spectacle too many times to begin now. Her hand found his ribs through the linen and pressed a bruise of relief upon him that would resemble desire to anyone watching. Let them. Daenerys came lightly, but the pier felt her. That is the way with some people. The air rearranges respectfully without being asked to pretend. Illyria turned to her the face she reserves for people she might love if they convince her they are not eager to be loved. "Queen," she said, name without title, a courtesy sharper than ceremony. "Illyria," Daenerys answered, tasting the name. She had learned to taste names. They were food, sometimes bread and sometimes spice. Some were poison. Illyria's eyes went across Daenerys' shoulder to the sky and then back. "Your shadow eats birds." "It does," Daenerys said, not smiling. "But it is not indiscriminate." "Good," Illyria replied. "I do not like indiscriminate. It is lazy and wishes to be applauded as righteousness." They moved from the pier like a tide itself, orphans and sailors absorbing and redirecting the press of curiosity with the improvisation of great hosts. Missandei walked with Oberyn's pace on one side and Daenerys's on the other, her hands quiet, her attention everywhere. She spoke to a woman who had lost a child years ago and was still teaching her mouth to admit other words. Missandei asked about boats as if that were the same as asking about grief, and perhaps it was. Grey Worm took in doors, rooftops, the distance to water, the quality of shoes on men who loitered without seeming to. Barristan's eyes walked ahead of them like old dogs that have decided to be dutiful even when bored. They did not go at once to Sunspear. A river does not correct a sea. It negotiates. They slept that night above Planky Town in a long house built of old ship ribs that had outlived their sea lives. The walls remembered storms and argued with the wind about it. Fires were lit and checked and banked. The dragon came low once, breaching the house's roof shadow, and the children in pallets along the wall pulled blankets over their faces and then lowered the blankets again to see better. Daenerys sat with fishermen and examined the calluses on their hands as one might read a book of verse. She asked questions without the impatient appetite for answers that turns questions into traps. Oberyn watched Illyria move from group to group like a knife passed under a throat to slice a rope cleanly and quickly. No blood, only liberty. When morning pretended it was noon, Dorne's light sometimes arrived already late, as if embarrassed to have been requested. The party boarded a shallow draft barge disguised as an argument about baskets and was poled upriver. Planky Town fell away and the green blood took its turn teaching the sea how to be slow. Along the banks, orchards leaned in. Children ran with reeds. A heron took 4 steps and decided abruptly to be air. The orphans sang in 2 languages at once, and the harmonies did not so much agree as decide to coexist. Sunspear rose not as a shock but as a sentence that had begun miles ago. The Shadow City flexed around it. The Tower of the Sun caught the late light and made of it a blade and then softened it. As a good kitchenman softens a blade's temper so it won't shatter in a prideful hand. The water gardens lay out to the northwest like a thought of mercy made stone. Daenerys took them in slow. She had learned not to fall in love with beauty immediately, lest it disappoint later by being a poor ally. But the gardens drew even her breath out and returned it cooler. Doran Martell received them in the water gardens not because he wished to remind anyone of Nymeria or because he loved children and fountains, though he did, but because he understood rooms. Water politely covers the sound of old men clearing their throats to object. Sun makes liars of angry faces. This was a room that punished pomposity from its very architecture. Areo Hoda stood as he stood always, an interruption to foolishness that never needed to raise its voice. Arianne sat at her father's right. She was the person in the room who would pass most quickly for a portrait. She disliked and was amused by that. Her dress was green enough to be called green and not a risky name for green, and upon one finger rested a ring that had belonged to a woman who had salted her own bread so no man could claim she ate his. Arianne watched the queen with the unblinking attention of a cat who has decided the visitor is both respectable and prey. They approached. Doran did not rise. He does not do theater when rehearsal must still be done. Instead, he inclined his head a degree that in court would have made messengers go home believing they had seen cordiality. Here it read as truth. This old man would not make the world bigger than it was, but he would ask it to be exact. Daenerys Targaryen, he said, the name sitting evenly in his mouth, neither sweetened nor salted. Welcome to a house that remembers. She bowed, not as a supplicant or a conqueror, but as someone who comprehends gravity and shares the burden willingly for a moment. Prince Doran, she said, I am honored. I do not think honor is the word you will need, he replied, eyes hooded against the sun's reflexive generosity. But it is a good beginning. Oberyn felt in himself a thread draw tight. He had twice in his life wanted to shake his brother like a tree and both times had chosen to embrace him instead. He did neither now. He stood at an angle where his body could be read as familial support or ready insolence. Ellaria, beside him, placed 2 fingers lightly against his wrist, a touch like a bell for calling him back should he depart his better judgment. Formal words wanted to be spoken. Men carve formal words like steps into a hill so their climb seems less steep. Missandei supplied them with perfect sufficiency. Gifts were named. The exchange of envoys recalled. The letters care praised without flattery. The dragon did not land, but a shadow passed when the conversation threatened to become too rehearsed, and everyone looked up and remembered why they were not merely practicing. A servant offered sugared lemons and cool water in cups shaped like open hands. Daenerys took water and let the lemon pass. Doran wet his lips with both, a man who knew how to flavor his thirst. Arianne declined with eyes that said she preferred to keep her mouth clear of sweetness in the opening movement of a negotiation. Your city, Doran said, unhurried, was not kind to news. It ate messengers and belched laws. You survived. That recommends you. But I do not propose to make of my home a mirror to your survival. You will say chains ended under your name. Very fine. You will say men burned who had learned to love the weight of iron on other men's necks. Very fine. Here, the iron was taken away generations ago at the price of marriages and stubbornness. You come with fire. We have learned water. I wish to know whether we can agree on steam. Daenerys disliked to be charmed into laughter when she had hoped to be stern. But she allowed the laugh, brief and without letting it dictate the conversation's terms. Prince, she said, you ask whether I am a kettle or a brazier. I ask whether you are an answer or an appetite. He did not move. My brother believes you can be both and that we can survive you. I have learned to trust my brother's bravery and distrust his hope. Oberyn bowed rakishly in acknowledgement of his own indictment. A ripple of amusement from Arianne. Areo did not move. Ellaria blinked once and did not pretend to sleep. You are not wrong to distrust hope, Daenerys said. Men dressed it in too fine a cloth and let it lie to them. I do not bring hope as a flag. I bring ships and a will not to be a piece on another man's board. I bring a name, but I do not place it on your table and leave it there as demand. I ask for alliance, not worship. And I do not consent to become the means by which you correct your past pain by producing new pain for others. Doran looked to the gardens where a boy had climbed a fig and was considering, now that he had reached the height he craved, whether coming down might be the cleverer part of the feat. He waited until the boy's friend below had shouted a piece of good advice and then nodded as the child found a sensible branch and lowered himself. We have learned, Doran said thoughtfully, to instruct our children in descent as much as ascent. His gaze returned. Tell me how you intend to go up and come down. She told him some and kept more for later. Missandei spoke when precision desired an advocate. Oberyn translated Doran's silent frown to a change of questions no one else in the room would have dared to make so early. Arian offered interruptions like small knives, bright and apparently decorative until taken up. Ellaria listened, and when she spoke at last, it was without ceremony. Do not ask us to love you because you suffered, she said to Daenerys, her voice no more raised than a hand upon a lover's chest. Ask us to love you because you learned. Daenerys received it as one receives a ring sized to a finger you had not realized wanted wearing. Very well, she said, and the words had become a ritual without growing stale. I will not demand the one. I will attempt to earn the other. In the shade of an orange, Hoda watched the way the queen placed her feet, the way the spearless prince balanced his weight, the way the daughter looked at the horizon when sentences that might have bound her were being spoken. He breathed with his usual steadiness and knew something old and unoriginal. This would be work, and he would live long enough to do some part of it, and his axe would be present in rooms where men imagined words protected them from the material world. The meeting dissolved into smaller conversations, the way a loaf of bread breaks into pieces that still taste of each other. Oberyn walked the paths with his brother until shade stitched them under a gallery. It is a particular craft, walking beside a man you have loved and fought and who knows where you hide your tenderness and may still leverage it. Doran's breath showed his fatigue to someone who knew exactly what to look for, and so it did not count as a confession. You brought her dragon into my sky, Doran said, without smoke and trumpets. I thought it wise to let the shadow do the speaking, Oberyn said. Men mistrust dragons. They mistrust shadows more. Between them, we can teach them to mistrust the right things. And what are the right things? Their own ease, Oberyn said promptly. The habit that makes a man say, "This is how it has been," and pretend that sentence ends the discussion. You taught me to be wary of habit when it becomes law. I teach your caution where to enjoy itself. He glanced sideways. You are afraid I have fallen in love. Doran took a slow breath, slow enough to place each word precisely. I am afraid you have fallen in love with your love of being near a flame. Oberyn smiled without apology. She burns, but she also studies the oxygen. That is new. I have admired many fires. Few know their own air. Do not become the wood. That, brother? Oberyn said softly, and laid his palm briefly over Doran's hand, which was a thrilling risk, is advice I have kept since I was 12. That night, the water gardens felt abundantly used. Children shrieked with a happiness that would read as unrest in rooms where men spoke of order as if it were a wife. The fountains made their active peace. Ellaria and Daenerys sat together in a half-privacy stolen from the day. The moon had not yet learned enough to interfere. Ellaria combed oil through her hair with her fingers and let her sentences fall like drops that stain where they land. Men will try to seat you on a throne like a needle, Ellaria said. It will look like a chair. It will be a point they want you impaled upon so they can spin you. Daenerys's mouth tightened, but not in surprise. I have discovered they like to admire a woman's balance if she must bleed to keep it. You will bleed anyway, Ellaria said. Make certain it is always for a reason you would tell a child. They spoke of Elia then because the night required it. Words were not necessary, and yet they were kind. Ellaria did not permit the dead princess to be made into a myth because myths are polite lies. She spoke of Elia's quick mind and slower lungs, of a humor that arrived like a hidden spring in a dry place, of the way she could occupy a silence without making others feel they ought to fill it, of her rage, which had been minimal and therefore more to be feared than an army when it chose to walk. Daenerys listened without interruption, because what she was being given was not information but an introduction to someone she would never meet and on whose account much might yet be asked. In the dusk, Nymeria and Tyene found Missandei by a pool where coins had fallen without belief in their own magic. They taught her the names of 3 winds that were sisters, all troublesome, all useful, and then made a game of tossing words into the pool to watch them grow wrong as they sank. Missandei retrieved them deftly before they drowned, translating in midair, and the 3 women laughed quietly, the pure humor of craft. Oberyn arm-wrestled with Grey Worm at a table sticky with fruit juice and did not win and did not lose in a way that had anything to do with wrists. They parted with an approximate respect that could be used later as a plank across a gap both understood. Barristan walked along a narrow arcade and found Areo, and for a time the 2 men spoke of nothing but the minutiae by which brass becomes green, and how best to prevent it or permit it depending on whether one wishes to be respected for diligence or beloved for patina. It was a relief sometimes to discuss only the care of metal. Plans formed in patient increments. The orphans would carry messages along the Greenblood and out into the Sea of Dorne. A small harrying of Lannister scouts along the northern edges of the crest would be undertaken, not to announce war, but to correct arrogance. Ships would assemble not as a spectacle but as an accumulation visible only when one stood on high places and counted. Ravens went out. Some returned with silence tied to their legs. Arianne went to the market of the Shadow City bareheaded and was recognized and was also not recognized. She moved like a woman half disguised and therefore fully seen. Men bowed because they had practiced and because bowing to power requires less imagination than refusing. She bought nothing for a long time and at last purchased 5 needles and a spool of common thread, and then she went home and sewed nothing at all, letting the thread lie against her palm so she could learn the weight and admit that sewing and ruling have this in common. You must care for the thing that joins. Doran spoke with envoys from the marches and did not ask them to share a meal, which is a way of saying, you are guests but not friends. He listened to tales of Lannister generosity that wore masks called terms. He inquired about water rights as if water were a synonym for soldiers. He did not mention the dragon because those who had not seen it were safer not knowing how their knees might wish to react. The first test came 2 weeks after Daenerys entered the Water Gardens as a guest and left them every day as something else that had not yet agreed to be named. An eagle-eyed boy looking for eels saw sails where no sails ought to be. Lean, hungry shapes wearing Lannister red as if it were holiness. They were not a fleet. They were an accusation. Oberyn arrived before he was sent for. The orphans had taught him their corners, and he had learned to move through the city like a rumor trusted by those it did not harm. Doran looked up from a map and down at it again. They count us, he said. We will let them learn their arithmetic, Oberyn replied. Not with fire, Doran warned, too quickly and revealing then what he had not meant to reveal. Fear not of damage but of spectacle that would drive men into patterns he did not wish to see them practice. Not with fire, Oberyn agreed. With chain. He had the coil called Regret brought up from a storeroom where it had been carried after a man with arms like knots had sold him lengths and laughed and told him he liked customers who asked for too much. He slung it onto his shoulder and his grin made even Areo blink in what would have been alarm if Areo were a man who permitted alarm to have a face. A little proof, Oberyn said, that not every old trick has been forgotten. They took 3 boats, narrow as grudges and faster. Oberyn captained one and Nymeria refused the second position and took it anyway by walking onto the deck and beginning to give orders in a tone that transformed a push into a caress. Tyene stayed with Ilaria. Someone had to keep the docks from turning gossip into prophecy, and she could talk to fishermen in a voice that implied each was about to be blessed. The Lannister ships made the common mistake of men who wear red lions on their sails and therefore presume the water will consent to be a savanna. They presented a broadside as if theater at sea winds contests. The orphans' longbows under Oberyn's mild command stroked the sky rather than slashed it. Arrows fell like punctuation. A helmsman 2 boats away from the lion's mane turned and thought the arrow in his shoulder an inconvenience rather than a message. Then he tried to move the arm and learned better. They did not attempt boarding. That was a game for men who had forgotten rivers do not forgive clumsy lovers. Oberyn took them close. Close enough to smell unfamiliar pitch and wine believed to be better than it was. And then he said, "Now!" And the chain left his hands like a snake too long confined. It went under the enemy hull and kissed it along a seam where wood was proud of its joinery. The men in red frowned and then corrected their faces to sneer, and by then water had entered as the chain had promised it would. A sailor tossed a flame pot in surprise where none had been called for, and men who have not practiced surprise are always worse off than those who sleep with it. They did not sink the ship. They made it limp back toward where it had come from, a lesson with a visible moral that would return intact for the telling. The other lion vessel corrected its gambol, bringing its bow around too sharply for a sea that had decided to be moderately irritable. Oberyn played with it, letting distance widen and narrow until the red sails looked insulted. Twice he could have cut their chance of home in half. He did not. Doran would appreciate the restraint, and Daenerys would, too. He had noticed she admired men who needed to prove less about themselves than the day demanded. When they returned, Illyria kissed him with relief disguised as annoyance. "You are too old to enjoy being clever," she said. "I am exactly the right age," he answered. "To confuse my enemies about the age at which I become boring." He put the coil back on his shoulder. "Also, I wanted the chain to learn the sea before I let it pretend to know it." Doran heard the tale in pieces and nodded through each. One slow nod at a time, as if agreeing to obligations under law he himself had written. He sent small gifts to the widows of men who had died having thought it a simple day. He did not send anything to the Lannister camp, for which omission he was called ungracious by men who had learned to expect condolences from those they had tried to harm. Daenerys listened to the telling with that particular attention of hers and said at last, "You see, we think alike. We disagree about so many small things," he returned gently, "that it becomes a pleasure when we find a large one we can place between us and both claim. Do not mistake this for proof," she warned. "It is an example. Proof is for measurers," he said. "Examples are for poets. And I am, if you have not noticed, an immodest poet of war." Preparations thickened. Letters returned from the Stormlands with oblique yes and more direct no's wrapped like eels in rushes. A knight of Tarth wrote in a hand that might have been described as honest if it had not been so severe and asked questions about oaths. A man who called himself of Nightsong wrote 3 law paragraphs and signed with 2 names and then struck one out and sent both. Ravens returned with arrows in their feathers. Dorne plucked the arrows and added them to a bucket of contempt kept by the kitchens for trimming meats deemed too proud. Daenerys walked the dunes at evening, where the sand cools as if ashamed of its afternoon hot temper. Drogon hunted at altitude, the flash and finality of his descent an act that made even men who despised being impressed count themselves privileged to have witnessed it. Sometimes, rarely, Rhaegal came in from some southward errand and sulked back out again as if the air above Dorne had not yet learned how to conduct him respectfully. Viserion was more companionable, playing along the thermals, letting children point up and say words they would not remember later when they tried to explain to their grandchildren why dragons are not merely large lizards with better press. On one walk, a child approached Daenerys with the solemnity only children and kings have in equal measure. He offered her a shell. She accepted it as if offered a treaty. "It's empty," he said, worried she might be disappointed. "Then it is ready," she answered. And the boy went away not entirely certain he had not been made fun of until his mother told him later that wise people like empty things because they can be filled. Missandei moved among the orphans like rain that refuses to choose favorites. She learned to scull in a morning and to read a 30-year-old man's face in a night and to say the name of a wind that arrived only in October with a surety that made the oldest river woman nod once, slowly, as if a seed on her tongue had sprouted. She gathered stories in her hand as one gathers small shells with a hole already through them, to string later into something that sounds like a song even when the singer is tired. Grey Worm taught boys whose fathers had been merchants to stand with their weight on both feet and dangle their hands so the bones in their forearms could transmit news to their fingers before a blade met them. He taught girls to keep their hair out of their eyes and their intention inside their chest until it needed to be released. He taught all to shout when it would help and not to when it would not, and endured no romantic nonsense about noble silence. He did not smile, and then he did, and the boys looked at each other as if being smiled at by this man were a private reward they were embarrassed to be caught enjoying. Aerion visited Daenerys in the late morning on a day too bright to be polite and traded courtesies with a bored accuracy that made each laugh for the wrong reasons and then laugh again at how often they had been required to smile when bored. They spoke, after the courtesies had washed themselves out, of inheritance. Aerion told her, with anecdotes and with the patient rage of a woman who had nearly lost what was hers to a letter, how Dorne kept its daughters in the family on purpose and not by accident. Daenerys listened as one listens in a foreign academy, writing notes behind her eyes, and when asked whether she would keep such habit in the West, she said, "I will keep every habit that has resulted in women able to answer me without permission." Aerion bowed at that, because bows can be used to mark agreements as well as to flatter, and in the bow each recognized in the other a dangerous ally and an enemy they would never be reckless enough to make. The night before the first deliberate sailing north, Oberyn lay awake in a room overlooking the shadowed city. He had spread Doran's letters across the floor, as if to make of them a map he trusted more than any painting. He read and reread the one line in which his brother had permitted himself a confession, that he feared the weight of Eliah's name was a millstone and a miracle, and that he had worn a brace around his own heart to keep from listing toward rage. Oberyn folded the paper and put it under the heel of his hand and pressed. He could hold the weight so long as he consented to feel it and not pretend to be a man who had outgrown being mad. He wrote a letter for Aerion and put into it the names of 3 sailors and a recipe for a curry he had eaten at a corner market in Meereen that had used too much turmeric and delighted him for its rudeness. He wrote to Ilaria a single sentence, "The longer I look, the more careful I wish to be," and then drew a small snake in the margin whose tongue made a heart and thought himself clever and then forgave the thought. He wrote nothing to Doran and understood that silence would be read as a promise and a taunt. He was comfortable with both readings. They sailed at last with a tide that had to be persuaded, a wind inclined to the north by courtesy, not preference. Dramans and cogs, orphan skiffs under tow, a lean associate caravel that decided loyalty is a form of entertainment, mixed company arranged by purpose rather than style. Daenerys stood in plain cloth with her hair bound because loose hair is a time-waster when the sea means to speak, and she listened to the helmsman the way one listens to a cousin who has seen more of the family than you and is unruffled by ugliness. The water did not complain. Weather kept a decent distance, although once a squall ran laughing along the horizon and stroked them with her wet fingers in passing, and sailors kissed their nails and touched wood for luck with all due superstition. Drogon kept high and off their starboard, a black judgment. Rhaegal showed himself twice, sullen as a boy dragged to a formal supper. Viserion slept above warm air and woke to snap at nothing in particular and then, finding himself adored for it, pretended he had planned it all along. They made Cape Wrath in 3 days more slowly than Oberyn would have liked and faster than Doran would have thought prudent. The headlands sulked. Men told each other stories in which the Cape had once been a giant turned to stone. Women said the giant had been a bad husband and the sea a better one. The first skirmish came upon them like a child slapping water for the fun of it and being surprised by the splash. Ironborn, lean and salt-crusted, slid from fog with the ease of men who conducted their lives without needing anyone's permission. Their sails were patched. Their axes were economical. Oberyn's mouth opened into a grin simply because he admires anyone good at their own work even when their work is murder. This time there was no chain. Chain is a lecture. Ironborn are not an audience. This time there was speed and a shout and the brief, appalling intimacy of ships shouldering. Obara went across a gap that should not have been crossable and laughed midair at the delight of disobeying physics. Nymeria kept the fisher bows talking. She told them that a target is an idea and hunters kill ideas as well as men. Grey Worm's commands came like the snapping of a scarf in a wind a sailor understands. Daenerys watched and did not call her dragons down. Twice she caught her breath as if pulling a child back from a precipice, and twice she loosed it as if the child had learned the cliff and would not fall this time. Barristan had his sword out without remembering that he had taken it from its quiet resting place. He found the old friend as one finds a room still precisely as you left it and sat down uninvited at a familiar table. Oberyn met a man across a space the size of a bed and admired his execution of a feint so much that he nearly thanked him for it before correcting the man's ambitions with a spear butt to the mouth and a kiss of ashwood to the temple. He moved with the joy he rarely permitted himself in any room where politics had hung like damp washing. After, he stood among ropes and breath and the sound ships make when they remember they are only wood, and he felt alive enough to be kind to a man in red hair whose ear was gone. He wrapped the head with Tyenne's cloth and said, "It is only a trimming. Many men are improved by losing something. We will go," the Ironborn captain announced, calm as coin. He spat into the water and then into his hand. "There are other men who think they own the sea. We will go persuade them to pay us for the education." "Take a story," Oberyn said. "Tell them we are teaching chains to bite." The Ironborn laughed with the unembarrassed laughter of men who know they will be dead one day and do not intend to make of it a tragedy every afternoon. They cast off. The fight had been short and the losses not inconsiderable, and Daenerys did not look at the dead yet, because to look too soon is to think you have done all the required work by observing. When land appeared in earnest, not as a rumor but as something that would demand names, they did not aim for King's Landing. That would have been bravado and stupidity masquerading as boldness. Oberyn took them to Secret of Water, a narrow mouth where sandbars wrote cowardly letters across the channel, and only a patient pilot with orphan knowledge could teach a hull to pronounce them. By night boats went in and out. By day men fished with nets and faces that defied recognition. 2 Stormland villages that had learned long ago not to ask whose coin bought their salt watched these comings and goings with the practiced disinterest of people who have lived through 5 claimants to a throne they never intended to occupy or visit. Daenerys went ashore on a beach made of crushed shells that today looked like rice and tomorrow would look like bone dust. She knelt and touched the tide line. It is a small thing, touching a tide line, and in it lies all of conquest and its rebuttal, where something gives way to something else and both pretend to mind and then begin to enjoy the exchange. She straightened and looked north, and the air between her and the concept of a capital filled with old ghosts too lazy to frighten and young ghosts too ashamed to show themselves. "We will not go at them as they expect," she said. "We will go at them as they behave." She looked to Oberyn. "You promised me the orphans know a tongue the Blackwater listens to." "They do," he answered. "It is a language made of patience and small nights in difficult weather. It sounds like the plash of a low or it looks like a coin in a boy's mouth because there is nowhere else to hide it. It smells of tar and anxiety and is beloved by fish. Teach it to me," she said. He did not pretend to be surprised. He taught her to sit low in a boat so her center of gravity would become a secret she could keep. He taught her the reed logic of the weeds at the river mouth, how they appear to resist and only wish to be respected, and then will cradle you through teeth sharp in the dark. He taught her how to find the scent of refuse without flinching, because rivers are honest about what his teach are. Own into them, and cities are liars. She learned as she learned everything, with praise for those who showed her and none for herself, because praise for oneself is a tax you levy on your own clarity. Ravens went inland to men who had always thought themselves a little bit coastal and now discovered they had a river's soul. A tenant of Haystack Hall wrote back a line that would be remembered. "Tell the sea we are not unwilling to be her cousins." A lesser knight of Tarth sent word that storms are raised by women and men only pretend to command. A father at Weeping Town made a quiet bargain to sell barley to any buyer who approached at night and brought news in his pocket. He later became famous for the quality of his floorboards, and no one could prove why. There is a time in every campaign when everything is not yet committed and yet cannot be recalled. A breath held before the plunge that convinces the body it is merely breathing. Doran calculated from Sunspear and calculated again, adjusting for weather and for the fact that his brother had learned to listen a little more than he had when he left. He sent Arianne to a parley with a minor lord whose minorness offended him into being dangerous. She came back with a promise she declared not binding and a smile that said the man would die for having imagined her the sort to be bound by what did not interest her. Ilaria became the court no court could hold. Her veranda collected men and women with questions that had exhausted other rooms. She fed them food salted correctly and sentences that led them to name their own stubbornness. She dressed simply and perfumed herself elaborately and laughed without apology, and no one noticed how much justice was done with the light pressing of her fingers on the world. On a night when the moon sulked and refused to contribute, Oberyn and Daenerys took a boat with 3 orphans and Missandei and no one else, and they went out upon the Blackwater as men with long city experience would have pointed and declared folly. The river pretended to be docile. It never is. The orphan boy in the stern told it he loved it without a word, and then made it believe him by the way he moved his oar. They slid along reed and mud and faint chemical perfume and the terrible, inexhaustible memory of burning oil. The air held that history as a throat holds a scar. The dragon passed high once and did not alarm the herons. The herons had decided to keep their opinions. Missandei whispered the names of the warehouse owners they passed as if she were reading the genealogy of a family expected to preen. Daenerys kept her hair low and her body still and learned the water's casual sentences. Oberyn watched starlight break across a ripple and found himself remembering Elia singing under her breath a tune that had no words and therefore could be applied to any grief or meal or birth. He did not speak her name because names on rivers are like sugar tossed into a wind. Messy and wasted and more about the tosser than the sky. A light blinked from a far, low place, the kind of light men make when they hope not to be noticed by anyone who does not already expect it. The boat altered course. A man rose from the bunched shadow of a pier and held out his hand without greeting. He helped Daenerys up as if she were carrying a child, and in a sense she was herself or a nation. The man's breath smelled of onions and fear. He led them along a path that existed only because many feet had insisted it did. The city above them muttered in its sleep. Once, a laughter sharp as glass fell from a window and broke on the ground, and no one went to pick it up. In a room that might have been used for counting once and now remembered only the rhythm of fingers, they met 3. A woman with a scar that missed her mouth by an inch and had not improved her speech. A boy who had become a man while waiting for a letter that never came and now preferred letters not to come at all. And an old man whose hands would not stop moving because if they did he might notice he was old. They did not bow. They listened to Daenerys say, "I am Daenerys," and blinked each according to their history. The boy said, "My mother said your name to me before sleep when my father had not yet returned from the mud gate." The woman said, "I do not care what you call yourself. I care how quickly I can sell salt without a lion in the price." The old man said nothing and then said, "This room used to smell of pepper," as if that were a prophecy. They traded maps that were not maps. Lists of men who like to be asked and men who prefer orders. Locations of private doors. Names of women not married to power and therefore often able to direct it. The hours when patrols grow chatty. A description of a dockmaster's wife whose discontent was so precise it could be calibrated and used like a watch. They traded silences as well, which is a currency more valuable than coin in stranded rooms. When they returned to the boat, the river did not immediately permit them to leave. It wished to show them a trick about a submerged log and a habit of effortless disaster. The orphan boy corrected respectfully and the log resigned its aspirations. Oberyn found he was grinning again, smaller this time and for himself. "You love danger," Daenerys said, almost as a remark rather than a censure. "I love competence in danger," he answered. "It is a distinction. Many men do not make it and die for the lack. I enjoy being alive too much to die from the wrong mistake." "You are sure there are right ones?" she said. "Oh, innumerable," he replied. "I am a collector." She laughed into the black where a city chose not to be reflected. The sound did not carry far. It landed in the boat and made the wood less alone. They did not rush. That will be what is remembered later, when men make it into a story with dates and trumpet calls. That they did not hurry. That they stacked deeds the way careful bakers stack the thin law. Years of pastry that are nothing by themselves and miraculous together. That they learned door by door, wind by wind, which parts of Westeros were tired of certain laws and which would tolerate much so long as food markets opened at dawn and peddlers were not taxed for being poor. Doran's gout punished him into staying in his chair more than he liked, and he used the stillness to think about men who had used movement to disguise that they had no thoughts. A raven from Old Town came on a wing that had seen too many holidays and brought a caution worded like a sermon and treated like a comrade. A scrap from the Reach was tucked in an empty sack and wrote justice because it could not yet afford to write allegiance. He did not waste outrage on the cheapness of such communications. Patience had given him enough interest on his investments to fund his habits. When the first open defection came, it did so in the form of a meal. In a whitewashed room at a ferry crossing where men who crossed the Mander pretended not to count how many times they had done it. A minor lord from a house minor enough to be overlooked by lions but not by tax collectors stretched his hand across a table and said, "I will serve you if you do not burn my mill." He did not say whom. He did not need to. He was speaking to Ilaria, who had come not because Doran had sent her but because the day had smelled of it. She agreed with the swift economy of someone who has always understood that a mill is more valuable than a promise written by a man who owns 3 coats and never wears any when it rains. She ate with him and asked him the names of his millstones and later gave those names to men who laughed and then remembered them. She returned to Dorne with nothing in her hands and everything in her mouth, which is where memory does its best work. On an afternoon that had intended to be mediocre and was forced by events to be memorable, Arianne discovered she could like Daenerys. Came upon her as a minor annoyance, like discovering a competitor shares your taste in shoes. Daenerys had listened to a long, delicate explanation of a Stormland's custom regarding widows' rents and had not once interrupted except to ask whom it benefited. Arianne admired people who cut lace with a plain knife. They walked together under shade and spoke of how men obeyed women when no one was present to applaud them for it. And each recognized in the other the craft a girl must learn in a place where men pretend their public loves are the only ones worth naming. "Will you marry?" Arianne asked, as if ordering figs and not committed to enjoying the answer. "Not to become allowed," Daenerys said. "Perhaps to become surprised." Arianne laughed. "Then I will need to choose you a husband of a kind I do not despise." "You will choose me nothing," Daenerys said lightly. "You will bring me a list, and I will decline most of it." "That will be more amusing," Arianne admitted. They parted with their backs warm and their fronts cool and their thoughts generously stocked. The plan that took shape around them would later be praised for its cunning. It was not cunning. It was attentive. It paid attention to doors and food and women and river mouths and the way tired men pull their boots on. It paid attention to the fact that a city is less a structure than a habit, and the habit can be altered if you introduce a new pattern and repeat it patiently until everyone believes they were doing it this way all along. It paid attention to dragons who love to be invited and to men who fear the invitation and to the possibility that if you make an example of a patrol captain at the right hour on the right street, every other captain will begin to imagine a different future for himself and govern his men accordingly. The night before they would put a piece of this attentiveness into the world in a way that could not be taken back. Oberyn sat with Barristan under a thin awning and poured wine, and did not pretend that the old knight's company did not satisfy the part of him that now and again desired to be measured by a yardstick he had once despised. "I think we are almost ready to make a mistake we can live with," he said. Barristan took a small swallow and sat with the wine in his mouth before letting it go. "I am not sure whether that is wisdom or impatience, and therefore likely wisdom. You will not come with us when we slide up the Blackwater like thieves," Oberyn said. "No," Barristan said. "I will stand where soldiers are meant to stand and make a noise large enough to be misinterpreted. It is my gift and now my curse. Also, I am not as quiet as I imagine myself." "I like you more for the admission," Oberyn said. "I sometimes suspect my silences are theatrical." "They are," Barristan replied, unexpectedly dry. "But you are so good at theater that sometimes reality takes its cues from you and everything works out." They compromised on laughter and sat quietly while the night began to lay out its notes. Somewhere, a woman sang 3 lines and then stopped, the unfinished melody a more accurate report of the world than any completed song. Oberyn thought of Elia, as he had promised himself he always would, and found her in the half-breath between the singer's 2nd and 3rd lines. It was enough. At dawn the boats went in like words you say under your breath so the room does not hear. Missandei rode with Daenerys because there are expressions that cannot be offered translation were the translator absent. Oberyn took the point with 2 orphans whose names he did not know because names are also noise, and today they required silence. Grey Worm arranged soldiers along alleys too narrow to be paraded and too well known to be ignored, men whose spears had learned to value doorframes and not merely banners. They passed under wing flap of gulls who have heard all the speeches of all the kings and reserve the right to despise bread distributed from horses. They asked a wharf where a woman counted bottles with exactly the same care she counted her children's breaths when they were sick. They passed an unimportant warehouse where a very important door would open in half an hour to allow a cart of onions to roll. But the onions had been bought with a coin that had a dragon on one side and an abstract promise on the other, and that would alter the course of 4 conversations before noon. The city did not wake to them as it had woken to others. It did not light itself as if to declare it were ready to be conquered. It shifted slightly, an adjustment made to prevent a cramp, and in that shift there was room for boats to slip, for men to step down and disappear and reappear, for boys paid in bread to shout their usual insults and thereby produce cover, for a woman with a scar that missed her mouth by an inch to stand in a doorway and lift her chin in a manner that opened a path half a street wide. When the first lion guard turned his head and saw a woman with hair like a piece of winter standing on a low boat as if she were the river's original draft, he did not run. He did not shout. He blinked. It is not enough to blink against history. He reached for the horn on his belt. Grey Worm's man was at his side already with a hand on the horn and a better idea about how to spend the morning. The horn made no sound. The river's small waves claimed it, and later a child would trade it for olives. And so it began not with a crash but with understatements piling up like gentle snow on a roof men had insisted would not cave. The dragon did not come. Would not come until fire was an argument and not vanity. Doors known to no one but widows and boys opened and closed. People who had not been asked for much in their lives were asked and said yes because the request was proportional and the reward evident. The Blackwater, nasty and honest, ran with them like an accomplice who would deny all under oath while delivering the knife on schedule. On the last stretch before the turn that would allow them to see the overspill of the Red Keep if they had been tourists, Daenerys put her hand in the water and kept it there as long as a breath and then took it out and did not shake it dry. Oberyn saw and nodded and did not romanticize it. The river does not accept new queens because they touch it. It sometimes consents to pretend to when it discovers the queens understand what has been asked of it all these years. They were not inside yet. They were only under. They were not victorious. They were only careful. They had not taken anything. They had simply placed themselves where taking would be possible and theft unnecessary. Oberyn's heart beat with the clean effectiveness he liked best in his body, and his mind quieted in the way it does when he is closest to being the man he intends. He thought of Valeria and her admonition not to do things for ghosts and told himself as one tells a recalcitrant child the same lesson again. Not for ghosts, for bread tables and river women and boys with horns and old men who remember Pepper, and for the particular way Arianne had smiled when she understood she could like a rival, and for Doran's slow nod and Missandei's sure words and Grey Worm's competing realism and Barristan's dignified patience, and for himself because he had decided a long time ago that he would not betray the boy he had been by becoming a frightened man. A bell began to sound somewhere, the clapper lazy, the toll indifferent, not a warning but an obligation. It was the city calling itself into another day. Boats tucked themselves into shadow. Men counted breaths. The dragon above held his arc. The river made a sound like someone drawing breath to speak.